Hey guys, welcome back. This is our lecture on the American Revolution. Let's take a look. All right, so we're going to look at some revolutionary ideas by two very important people. That's John Locke and Thomas Paine. Okay, John Locke is an Enlightenment philosopher, and Thomas Paine is a political writer. All right, John Locke, Enlightenment philosopher. Remember the Enlightenment from World II, the Age of Reason. People are using science to explain the world around them. So, for example, they're saying, okay, it didn't flood because we made God angry. It flooded because snow melted in the mountains and overflowed the banks of the river. So they're explaining the world around them with science, and they're taking the same approach to government. All right, John Locke said we're all born with rights. They don't come from earthly rulers. All right. Remember that for a long time, kings and queens have said, hey, I am the authority of God on earth. I am in charge because God said so. Now John Locke is saying, no, kings and queens are people just like everybody else. And in fact, they don't get their power from God. They get it from the people. So John Locke says we're all born free and we're born equal. And we have natural rights. And those natural rights are life, liberty, and property. John Locke says power lies with the people. All right, so we have the power, it lies within us. We let the king be king. John Locke says that the people enter into a social contract to have government. So basically what he's saying is, and he got this idea from Thomas Hobbes, by the way. We don't talk about Hobbes, but we enter into a social contract with the government. So, for example, I am not free to do whatever I want. I can't go and drive as fast as I want on the highway. So I'm not absolutely free. I've entered into a social contract with the government to obey those laws, and in exchange, my rights are protected. So other people aren't free to spray, destroy my home, or drive as fast as they want on the highway and take away my life, liberty, or property. So we give up the freedom to do whatever we want with the expectation that the government will protect our rights. This is called ordered liberty. Government powers are limited and they're specific. So they're spelled out and they're derived. The government gets its power from the consent. Consent means permission of us, the people. The consent of the governed, the permission of the people. We have separation of powers. We have three branches of government that I'll talk about. Check it out. If the government breaks the contract, if it breaks that social contract that I told you about, it's our right to change the government or completely get rid of it and create a new one. All right. Thomas Paine is an 18th century political writer, and he writes a pamphlet called Common Sense. Common Sense helps convince a lot of people in the colonies to declare independence from England. All right, let's take a look at Thomas Paine's Common Sense. It says America gets no benefit from being associated with England. Remember in the last lecture when I told you guys about like the greedy octopus and mercantilism? We're the tentacle. What benefit is there from being the tentacle in that analogy? Not one. So we want to be the head of the octopus, right? Thomas Paine said it's crazy that a king on a throne all the way across the Atlantic rules this vast continent on which he's never set foot. He says that's absurd. That means it's silly, right? And a lot of people are like, yeah, why is that the relationship? Okay? Thomas Paine says that the law is king, not an absolute monarch. The law is king. Common Sense by Thomas Paine was widely read and contributed to a desire for independence from England. All right, let's take a look at the Declaration of Independence and see if we can see Locke and Paine's ideas in the Declaration of Independence. Let's take a look. So this is from the Declaration of Independence, which was written by Thomas Jefferson. All right, and it says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, we could get rid of pursuit of happiness here and put in property, right? And you'd have John Locke's natural rights. Pursuit of happiness and property mean the same thing. So that's Locke. Here's another quote from the Declaration of Independence: that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. That means governments instituted among men means governments are created, and they derive their that means that justice, their rightful powers, they derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. Consent means permission. Who is the governed? We're the governed, guys. We're the governed. You and me. We are the governed. We're the people. Consent of the governed means permission of the people. That's John Locke all day. So Thomas Jefferson he's like an English class, and he's copying John Locke's paper. Okay. Whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends. What does that mean? Whenever any form of government infringes upon people's natural rights, it's the right of the people to change the government or to abolish it and make a new one. Thomas Paine's also going to find his way into the Declaration of Independence. He wrote a series of grievances, and those grievances will be included in the Declaration of Independence sent to King George. The word grievance, just think complaints. You think of these as 27 complaints about the king, 27 grievances about the king for cutting off our trade with all parts of the world. Remember, I said greedy octopus, mercantilism. England only wants the colonies to trade with England, and they don't like that. For imposing taxes on us without our consent, for depriving us of a trial by a jury. So these are just some of the grievances that are discussed in the Declaration of Independence. All right, let's look at some ideals from the Declaration of Independence. One is equality. All right, in this class, I'm going to use the word franchise a lot. Franchise means voting rights. Your franchise is your vote. It's the most kind of fundamental building block of our democracy. So extending the franchise of voting is something we're going to talk about a lot. Now we're going to start off, only white males will be able to vote, okay? But over time, you'll see the vote extend from white male property owners to all white males, from all white males to, we'll see the 15th Amendment will allow black males to vote as well, although they will be disenfranchised. Their voting rights will be taken away by something called Jim Crow laws, and we'll talk about those. And then women will get the right to vote in the 20th century with the 19th Amendment. Due process of law. You have a right to a trial by a jury of your peers. If you are accused of committing a crime, you've got to go to court, right? And you got to prove you're innocent, right? No, you don't have to prove you're innocent. You shouldn't have to anyway. You are assumed to be innocent. There's a presumption of innocence. The state, the government has to prove that you did what they say you did. They have to prove you're guilty. The burden of proof is on the state. You have due process of law. And you get a free public education. That may not seem like a right. That may not seem like a privilege, but trust me, it is. And in places around the world, you'll find that one of the first things that gets taken away in oppressive societies is a free public education. Uneducated people are easier to oppress. And a lot of people in the United States over the course of its history have fought and died, have suffered greatly, and we'll talk about that, just so we can all be in the classroom together doing this. All right, moving on. So social participation, that's liberty. And the example here is, let me move this picture out of the way. There we go. The example here is abolishing slavery. So the 13th Amendment is going to abolish slavery. We're going to see civil rights guaranteed to women and other groups. All right, social participation. Economic participation, the pursuit of happiness. One way we're going to see economic participation increase is through regulation of the free enterprise system. Now, you might think, well, how does regulating the free enterprise system allow more people to participate in the economy? Well, think about it. If we don't have any regulation of free enterprise, people can do whatever they want. So let's say you have a factory and they say, well, it's too expensive to dispose of this toxic waste properly, so I'm just going to dump it in the bay. Well, that's better for them. They're going to be able to pursue happiness more because they're saving money by dumping their toxic waste in the bay. But what happens to the fishermen that use the bay? What about their happiness? What about their economic participation? So we have to have some regulation of the free enterprise system in order to make sure that everybody can participate in the economy. We also protect property rights. Protection of property rights is important. So like, let's say you write a book. You can copyright that book, all right? And then nobody else can come along and steal your ideas and call them your own. Imagine if you spent months writing a book and then somebody else just copied it, said they wrote it, and sold it. That's your intellectual property, right? So we protect property rights to make sure people can pursue happiness. Let's look at causes of the American Revolution. All right, the root of the conflict lies really in, like I told you guys, the colonists used to being left alone. Remember the analogy that I used? If I came into the classroom at the beginning of the year and I just didn't bother you, I didn't say anything to you, I left you alone, and then at the end of the year, suddenly I started to make rules and try to teach. At the end of May, I tried to do all that. You guys would not react well to that. The colonists are going to react the same way. So they were used to being left alone, but then there was the French and Indian War. The French and Indian War, it was a rivalry. It was the North American front of a global rivalry or conflict between the British and the French. So the French had Indian allies. They fought against the British. The British won. The war ended in 1763. Even though the British won, the war was really expensive. And so the king is going to have to start taxing the colonists in order to pay for British troops in North America. Remember, the colonists are used to being left alone. They're not going to like this. They're going to get really upset. All right. So, causes of the American Revolution. Number one is the Proclamation of 1763, which prohibited, that word prohibited means banned settlement west of the Appalachians. All right. So, it was expensive for the British to continue to protect the colonists against Native Americans. But the colonists kept pushing west. When they pushed west, they got in conflict with Native Americans. So the king said, no more. You can no longer go west of the Appalachians. Well, check it out, guys. People want land. And there's land west of the Appalachians. And people really want to go west. This is going to make a lot of people really upset. All right. Number two, taxes. Taxes on legal documents, like the Stamp Act. Okay. Which was a tax on, like I said, a tax on legal documents. They called it the Stamp Act because they would affix a stamp to the document when you paid the tax. And this was on all sorts of legal papers. It was even on playing cards. You're also going to get the tea and sugar acts. These are all to pay for the cost of the French and Indian War and to pay for British troops to protect the colonists. Now, people all over the British Empire paid taxes. But the colonists were used to being left alone. Any kind of tax, no matter how small, was going to make them mad. Number three, resentment. Resistance to British rule mounted. The British are there. The colonists don't like it. They want to be left alone. And that's going to lead to war. All right. So colonial response to war, you've got three different groups. You have patriots, loyalists, and also known as Tories, and you have neutrals. Let's take a look at these three people. Patriots believe in complete independence. They're inspired by the ideas of Locke and Paine and words like from people like Patrick Henry, who famously said, "Give me liberty or give me death." They're going to provide the troops for the American army, which is going to be led by George Washington, by the way. Neutrals are exactly what they sound like. They're neutral. They're the colonists who tried to stay as uninvolved. They just wanted to stay out of it. And then you have loyalists, also known as Tories. They remain loyal to the king. They thought taxation was justified to pay for British troops. If you look over here, you see this guy right here. He's a Tory, a loyalist. He's probably a tax collector. And what they like to do to these tax collectors was to take them and then pour hot tar, so they would get the tar boiling hot. They would pour it all over these guys, and then they would cover them in feathers. It was called tarring and feathering. Sometimes it would kill people. It was definitely a very excruciatingly painful punishment. All right, so loyalists or Tories. All right, let's look at the beginning of the war. So this is the Boston Massacre. Essentially what was happening was Boston was a hotbed of revolution. A lot of people there really wanted to declare independence. And they were sharing their homes with British troops. They were in close proximity to British troops, so tension was building. A large, angry crowd surrounded a small detachment of British troops. The British lost their nerve. They opened fire on those anti-British demonstrators, okay? And basically, this sent shockwaves through the colonies. So people said, oh, the British are mowing down Bostonians, and we need to declare independence. Now, there's two sides to this story, as always, and you've got to understand that, and I'll show you a couple different pictures here in a little bit, but those anti-British demonstrators were throwing rocks, throwing snowballs with rocks in them at the British soldiers. They had surrounded them. One of the British soldiers got hit in the head with a club. So it was portrayed as a massacre, but it was more of a skirmish. But it was definitely used as propaganda to declare independence. The Boston Tea Party was staged. Remember, I told you that England said that the colonists could only buy tea from England. As a symbol of protest, the Sons of Liberty they dressed, so you can see them, they're right up here. They dressed as Native Americans. The Sons of Liberty was an underground resistance group. They dressed up as Native Americans and threw millions of dollars in today's money, threw millions of dollars worth of tea down here into Boston Harbor, okay? And as a symbol of protest, all right? And this enraged Parliament. All right, so event 3, the First Continental Congress was called. This is a meeting of leaders from all the colonies to talk about what they needed to do. Should we try to reconcile with the king? Should we declare independence? It was the first time the colonies, most of them anyway, acted as one. The first battle of the Revolution is at Lexington and Concord. All right. And so let me move this out of the way here for you. There we go. So the first battle of the Revolution is at Lexington and Concord. And you have these Minutemen. And this is actually a symbol for the National Guard. The National Guard are citizen soldiers. They use this as their symbol today. The Minutemen were citizen soldiers. So they're farmers and artisans, businessmen, you know, and they would just train in their off time and be ready at a moment's notice to grab their weapons and go and defend their homes and their towns. And that's why they called them Minutemen. And so the Minutemen fight a skirmish with British troops, a small battle with British troops at Lexington and Concord, and that becomes the first battle of the Revolution. All right, here we go. There is the famous "Give Me Liberty or Give Me Death" speech by Patrick Henry. Now here is one picture of the Boston Massacre, and you can see it is definitely portrayed as a massacre. But here's another one. Look at this. There's Crispus Attucks, African-American sailor who was also agitating for independence, right? Look at this guy. He's got a club. This British soldier has been hit in the head with a club and knocked on the ground, right? They're much closer to each other, and they're clearly fighting. Some are going away from them, some are going toward them. So as you can see, there's two different sides to this story. All right. Boston Tea Party, signing of the Declaration of Independence, written by Thomas Jefferson, the Spirit of 76. George Washington, we will kill you in your sleep on Christmas. George Washington, he crossed the Delaware and caught the Hessians by surprise. These are mercenaries working for the British, caught them by surprise in their winter camp and scored a major victory. Surrender of Cornwallis at Yorktown. We'll talk about that. Little side note, Cornwallis wasn't actually the one that was surrendered. He wasn't feeling well. I'll put some quotes there. So he sent his lieutenant, he sent his lieutenant to surrender for him. Sounds like maybe he had a case of hurt feelings. All right. Ben Franklin made this. Look, it's all the different colonies, right, separated, and it says join or die. What statement is Ben Franklin making? He's saying if we don't unite, we will perish. Factors leading to American victory. Let's take a look. After the American victory at Saratoga, Ben Franklin negotiated a treaty of alliance with France. This is a major diplomatic factor in our victory. Diplomacy is negotiating with other countries. We were negotiating for a treaty of alliance with France. They didn't know that it would be worth it because we weren't doing very well, to be quite honest, at the beginning of the war. But after the Battle of Saratoga, which was an American victory, the French were convinced that we had a chance of winning. So they sent advisors, they sent men and material, and they sent ships. We really needed ships. Those ships are going to become really important at the Battle of Yorktown because the French are going to establish a blockade that is going to prevent the British from escaping Yorktown and allow us to win the Revolutionary War. Our distance from England is considerable. Look at that. That's a long way across the Atlantic. We have the home field advantage. Our supply lines are short. Theirs are long. We're spread out over a big territory. Basically, the British only control where they are at the moment. Also, whenever they go places, they make everybody mad. Meanwhile, we are able to just go home. And our supply lines are very short. We know the terrain, so we have the home field advantage. We have a political and ideological advantage too. We're defending our homes and our families and fighting for independence. British soldiers are thousands of miles away from their homes, and they're fighting an unpopular war. The war is very unpopular in Great Britain, and the longer it lasts, remember one of the reasons all this started was because the king was broke and started messing with the colonies. Now England is caught up in an expensive war that is seemingly endless, all right, and it is becoming increasingly popular. And George Washington knows that. Washington knows that the war is unpopular, and he knows that as long as he keeps the war going, he's got a chance of winning. The British would really like it if the American army would just meet them on the open field of battle, because then they could score a major, decisive victory and end the war. The British Army is the largest, most highly trained, most well-equipped military in the world. We're not going to give them that big battle that they want. We're going to use guerrilla-style tactics. So, like, we're going to cut down a tree and lay it across the road. And then here comes a British convoy. They stop to clear the tree out of the road. And then Continental militia attack them and ambush them from either side, from the woods. They shoot all the British soldiers. They take the supplies from the convoy, and then they disappear back into the woods. So we're going to cut their supply lines. We're going to blow up their ammunition dumps. We're going to assassinate their officers. This was a time when it was considered unchivalrous. It was considered inappropriate to target officers. But guess what? American sharpshooters are going to be like, all right, Let me see who everybody's saluting. Okay, it's that guy. Let me shoot that guy. So we're going to assassinate officers, and that is going to horrify the British. British officers pay for their commissions. It's considered a really good way to get up in the world, right? They're going to stop doing that. No wealthy English noble wants to go to the New World and get shot by some American farmer. So they're like, no way, Jack, not me. George Washington avoids any situation that threatens the destruction of his army. The consequence of this is that America will win. The last battle of the Revolution is the American victory at Yorktown. Cornwallis surrenders to Washington at Yorktown, ending the Revolutionary War. Okay, this concludes our SOL3 or SOL4 lecture. Make sure you guys do the discussion board and the replies. Make sure you read the narrative and answer the questions, and make sure that you guys fill out those guided notes.